Welcome to The Pie. I'm your host, Tess Vigland. Economists are always talking about the pie, how it grows and shrinks, how it's sliced, who gets the biggest share. In this show, we're talking about the most pressing matters of the day seen through the lens of economics. The Pie is a production of the University of Chicago's Becker-Friedman Institute for Economics. And in this episode, we have another extra slice for you with guest host Ben Krause. He's the executive director of the Institute. Good to have you back with the show, Ben.
Thank you, Tess.
All right, who do we have the honor of hearing from today?
So I sat down with the distinguished professor emerita at the University of Illinois Chicago, Deirdre McCloskey. She's author of several books, including the Bourgeois trilogy. She's a senior fellow and holds the Isaiah Berlin Chair of Liberal Thought at the Cato Institute in Washington, D.C. However, she spent much of her career here in Chicago, including teaching for at least a dozen years in the University of Chicago's economics department.
All right, and what should we know before we take a listen here?
So Deirdre and I scheduled our sit down together when she was back on campus last fall for a public event, sharing the stage with UChicago Nobel laureates James Heckman and James Robinson, as well as Northwestern's Joel Mokyr, to discuss cultures and markets, the potent mix that fueled growth from the Industrial Revolution to the present, which we both end up referencing, so we'll be sure to provide a link for those who are interested in the full picture.
All right, well, let's get to it. Here's Ben Krause in conversation with Deirdre McCloskey.
So I had the great pleasure of reading your recent article, Liberalism Caused the Great Enrichment.
Yeah.
So I thought I would just start by asking you, because I understand you coined the phrase Great Enrichment.
I did.
What do we mean by that? What are you trying to communicate?
That coinage is not especially important. Every historian who knows the history and every economist who thinks about it knows that there was an astonishing increase in real income per head from, say, the year 1776, symbolic, for the publication of Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations.
That's right. Yeah.
To now, in income per head in the world, it's simply astounding. And in 1776 or 1800, any date you want to take, the average person in the world earned about $2 a day. Now imagine trying to survive in Chicago on $2 a day. You'd be sleeping rough, you'd have one suit of clothes, and so on. And now the average in the world, including all the still poor countries, is $50 a day. 2 to 50. To sort of keep that in your mind, that's the average income in Brazil. It's also the average income now in China. And China started 40 years ago at the $2 line. Now, in the United States, it's $130 a day. In Switzerland, it's more like $180. So great enrichment seems an appropriate term. You can also call it modern economic growth. You can't call it the Industrial Revolution, which is too narrow and inaccurate a term. And my claim is that it's not capital accumulation that caused it.
Right.
That's what we used to think. I did for years. It's not piling brick on brick. Or even when we started thinking about human capital, invented here at the University of Chicago, we started thinking of BAs accumulating, or high school degrees, or anyway, people getting educated, and said, yes, that's the key. No, it was not that, nor, to speak of my past as a Marxist and my friends on the left, was it exploitation. It wasn't either of these. It was, now I always stutter in my favorite word, it was liberty. And there's just an astonishing change in this from the 18th century on. This idea of what I'm calling now equality of permission, which is the core idea in liberalism, was an 18th century invention of a few intellectuals like Smith. I always cross myself when I mention Adam Smith, and we all should. So it's this idea that men, women, blacks, whites, free, slave, upper class, lower class, should all have equal permission to join the race of life. And that's what caused the enrichment. Now, how so? Because it inspired in the Latin meaning of that, it changed the spirit, the breath is the Latin word, in people. Slaves don't innovate. Small children don't innovate. And all the other systems that we've tried, as Churchill said from time to time, that didn't work, monarchy, socialism, even modern social democracy, which most of my friends are, didn't work. What worked was this freeing of the creative human imagination. And you can show this statistically. You can show it in the novel. You can show it in all kinds of ways. Show it in quantitative ways and qualitative ways. That it was this change in attitude. Now, it was very slow. After all, the United States until 1865 had slaves. The Married Women's Property Act in Britain wasn't until 1874. Slowly. And the result was more and more people were brought into the creative liberty. And that made the modern world. All around you, you see evidence of this. Not just in physical inventions, such as what we're using right now, but in, so to speak, spiritual inventions, like the invention of the modern university in 1810, the University of Berlin, institutional inventions like that as well. So that's the story. It's not matter, it's not accumulation, nor is it the institutions that James Robinson talks about. It's freeing people, allowing people, I say in the English expression, to have a go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As they say in Australia, fair goes.
And I think you coined another phrase, much like the Bard here for economics, innovism.
Yeah.
And why did we need that new term?
Well, because capitalism is a really poor word in lots of ways. It's a poor word scientifically because it puts your attention on capital accumulation as the cause of the modern world. But the trouble is that all societies accumulate capital. I mean, from the caves on, humans have accumulated capital. Roman roads, Chinese Grand Canals, come on. Capital accumulation is normal. I'm a student, and in fact, I'm working on a long book on English medieval agriculture. And in the Middle Ages, the yield per unit of seed of wheat was 4 or 5. 4 or 5 you got from one seed.
Yeah.
Well, that meant you had to save a quarter to a fifth of your crop every year, or you wouldn't get any next year.
Yeah.
So you're starving children in the spring, whining to you, oh, please, Daddy, Mommy, give me something to eat. You had to deny them to take the seed, to take their food out of their mouth and cast it on the plowed field. So saving is routine. And it's not true, as my earlier Marxist opinions, and my still Marxist friends would say, the history of the modern world is not about capital. Thomas Piketty, for example, is obsessed by this.
Yeah.
As a more or less standard issue neo-Marxist, he goes, it's capital accumulation. We got to stop that damn those bad people, paying for their child's education, so forth. And that's not where modern growth comes from. It comes from new ideas. I mean, in a way, it's what I'm saying is blindingly obvious. New ideas, new inventions have to come from your mind or my mind or an individual mind. And so what economists should be aiming at, economists and historians and others, should be aiming at finding what the conditions are that make for that creative individual inspiration. Now, this can happen in corporations, it can happen in nations, it can happen all over the place, but it's not the nations or the corporations that are doing it. It's individuals within them. So a free society produces enrichment. And the reason that all societies are not yet rich is that not all of them are liberated. And I would think it'd be hard to deny this in view of what happened in China and India in the last 40 years. First China, then India, relaxed their top-down state grip on the economy. And the mere relaxation was enough to let people move to new jobs. The ordinary worker is an entrepreneur, in my view. She stakes her life on a move for a better job. That's entrepreneurship. And certainly in both countries, first in China, then in India, the ease with which you could start a business, as long as you paid a little extra to the Communist Party official or the local Indian official, you could start a new business. So in both of these countries, there was this hockey stick of growth which has started, and I'm actually convinced that India, in the end, is going to be the great creative economy of the next century.
And say more. Why do you see that?
Well, because it's liberated. I was just there, which doesn't make me an expert on India, to put it mildly. It was very hot. We saw the Taj Mahal in 100-degree heat, which is really rough. But you can start a business in India. Yeah. It's not perfectly easy.
Right.
It's not like New Zealand or something, but it's not so bad.
It's gotten dramatically easier.
Much easier than under what the Indians called, and with sarcasm, the license Raj. They went from the Raj back in London to the license Raj, with, of course, the people with the power to turn on the electricity or license your moving a machine from one part of your plant to another with their hands out. Yeah. And that's changed, although I've actually seen bribes being paid in India, not on this last trip, but in an earlier one. But still, corruption isn't the problem. It's letting people have a go. Fair goes for all. That's equality of permission. And that's the I don't know, you can think of all kinds of things. That's the spring in the mechanical watch. That's the secret ingredient, makes for a wonderful stew. It's not these other things. It's not capital accumulation, and it's not a colonialism or slavery that caused the modern world.
So you talk about in your writing, you famously wrote the sort of bourgeois trilogy.
I did.
With talking about the bourgeois deal.
Yeah.
So I'm taking from you that India is making that deal right
It is
now.
very much.
And could you explain a little bit more about what that deal is?
Well, it's mainly the attitude of the rest of society towards innovators. This is something that people like Dr. Samuel Johnson and Adam Smith and Benjamin Franklin in the 18th century complained about. They complained about the people, the general people, lots of people in the government, people outside the government, being sneering and sort of dismissive of the middle class, especially of the inventors, the innovators. They're so vulgar. We're still aristocratic,
Yeah.
and we look down on those mere merchants. And that started to change. Between Shakespeare and Jane Austen, there is a change in England. Starts in Holland, actually, but in England and then in Scotland and then in the American colonies, which I call the bourgeois revaluation. And it's not Max Weber. I'm not Max Weber in drag. People kind of take that as though that's what Deirdre does, because they look at the titles and they can't understand what I'm talking about, and so they think I'm just Max Weber. No, Max Weber got it almost completely wrong in the theology and the history and the sociology and the psychology. Everything's wrong. But the one thing he got right is that ideas matter. That when people, and sociology matters, it's somewhat odd that one of the inventors of modern sociology, Max Weber, took a psychological view, which still dominates the modern thinking about entrepreneurship. You go study entrepreneurship in this building or across the street at the business school, they're always talking about the psychology of the business person. That's not it. What's crucial is the attitude of the rest of the society. When the rest of society says, no, you've got to be regulated, you're a capitalist, boy, are you dangerous, we got to crush you, then you don't get economic growth. Or indeed, if the state is just a bunch of gangsters, which actually most of them are. So it's this change. Shakespeare has no hero who is bourgeois. You say, wait, the Merchant of Venice, Antonio. No, Antonio's a fool for love.
Yeah.
It's Bassanio, with whom, by the way, Antonio's in love.
Yeah.
He's a nobleman.
Yeah.
And pursuing a noble marriage, and that's the engine of the plot. The Jew, Shakespeare didn't know any Jews, which makes it a little questionable whether it was actually Shakespeare who wrote this play, but still, let's set that issue aside.
Could only open so many books at one time.
That's right. But Shylock is, although he speaks in blank verse, not in prose. Ordinarily in Shakespeare, the comic characters and the lower class, including the merchants, are in prose, and the aristocrats, "Oh, Harry, thou hast robbed me of my youth." They're in blank verse, but interestingly, Shylock is, but that doesn't mean that he approves of him. On the contrary. So then you go all the way to Jane Austen, whom I worship, and she doesn't talk a lot about the bourgeoisie in the city, although one of her brothers became a banker in London. But the middle class in the countryside, the so-called farmers as against landlords, they're treated with great respect. And she was, to use her favorite word, amiable towards the middle class. And that's the change. It's in between there. And I have lots of evidence for that. And whereas in France across the channel, not so much. Inventors in France were chained to the state, l'État. In order to build a new water mill in some part of France, you had to, in the 18th century, submit a proposal to a committee in Paris.
Not so different than the license rouge in India.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. It was the same idea. We got to control this. Let's have some planning here. We got to get it under control. And whereas in England it was anarchic, but it worked. And the engineers in England were commercially oriented. They were doing, on the whole, government contracts. Engineers in France had all been trained in les grandes écoles, chaussées, and mean that they were government focused, and they were working for the military.
Yeah.
Not they weren't primarily oriented towards ordinary consumers. So there's the contrast.
Yeah.
Without Britain, again without Holland, which is often forgotten because it started this somewhat earlier, this innovism wouldn't have happened.
And then you write down a production function.
I do at the end of the piece to show that I'm still a neoclassical economist and I can do this stuff that they like to do.
And you can highlight some foxy results, I believe, is the term that you...
That's right.
Yeah.
By foxy, I don't mean in the female sense. I mean fox versus hedgehog, as in Isaiah Berlin's terms. A fox knows many small things. A hedgehog knows one big thing. That was his contrast. And so there are all kinds of mathematical tricks you can do with production functions to, for example, education as the supposed cause of the modern world. I just don't think so. And one reason not to think so is that the cross-sectional results on years of education don't have the magnitude to explain a change from $2 a day to $50 a day, not to speak of 130. College graduates don't earn 25 times what a non-high school graduate earns. It just doesn't happen. So there's grave doubts that this kind of accumulation, and certainly you can show that physical accumulation has radically diminishing marginal returns. You know, how many cars do you own? I take it.
We got one.
You got one, you know? How about if I gave you 6? Would that be... If you had,
Jay Leno might start hanging out with me. Yeah, let me honest.
Well, that's right. If they were a certain kind of car, but if you were paying for them, and you as the husband, say, you went out and got 6 cars, your wife would divorce you.
Probably before we get
any rational woman would flee in terror from some guy who bought 6, I don't know, Fords.
Yeah.
Because, and this, of course,
Accumulated.
this is a fundamental principle in economics, and people have just slid by it. They say, oh, well, it's capitalism, and that suggests that capital accumulation is what we need, and we got to look at S, the savings rate, and we've got to do a solo growth model. By the way, I hired Bob Solo's son at the University of Iowa, John Solo, and their family and mine are kind of intertwined in many ways. But it's wrong. It's not delta K that made the minor world. Now, of course, look around us. There's a lot of delta K.
Yeah.
But that's because of innovations. That's because new ideas made building this building, building Chicago.
Yeah.
Why did we invest in Chicago as against St. Louis? St. Louis had the rivers, but Chicago had the link between the Great Lakes and the Mississippi, and it was a perfect place to bring hundreds of ships filled with lumber that my ancestors and my father's side were cutting down in northern Wisconsin. It was a good place to make steel. It was a good place to do all kinds of things.
Yeah.
And those were ideas. Someone said,
We're going to be finding Chicago here.
That's right. Here's this swampy place. The Indians called it swampy. Now, wait a second. It's the lowest point in the Continental Divide, or not the Continental Divide, the divide between. It's the lowest portage. It's the lowest portage.
Yeah.
That's why the Indians were here. Mm-hmm. So anyway, it's ideas, it's liberation of slaves and women. I mean, the first great accomplishment of liberalism was the abolition of slavery. And that's indicative. That points to what the real cause of the modern world is.
And so you, in your model, early, I think you open the article by saying, generally speaking, the agent in economic models is a vending machine.
Exactly.
Completely alienated.
And it choose the gender carefully, is a kind of, is a vending machine, has a stimulus and response.
Yeah. And instead you introduce I
introduce the I, the person, the real person. I call it humanomics. Yeah. You don't throw away the production functions and all we learned from Adam Smith and the other Smith. And the other Smith, Vernon Smith, my dear friend, who's approaching 100.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's kind of obvious, but it's ideas in human heads freed that made the modern world.
And you go into, I don't remember if it was in this article or in some of your other writing, you go back to Adam Smith and
I do.
And revive or maybe bring back to prominence or just remind us all that he started with theory of moral sentiment.
Yes, he certainly did in 1759. His other great book, my former colleague, the great economist George Stigler at the University of Chicago, grossly misunderstood Smith. He thought he was all about a kind of simpleton's view of the wealth of nations. And George said it was built on self-interest. That is to say, this vending machine, stimulus response. No, it's the freeing. Actually, here's a sharp contrast between the way most economists view Adam Smith and the way he actually was. In the theory of moral sentiments, he spoke of children. He spoke of how children become adults. And that dropped out of Western philosophy after Machiavelli and Descartes. And the modern social scientist often, and certainly the modern political philosopher, think of their understanding of society as a bunch of grown-up men bargaining with each other. That's I call him Max U. He's this guy, Max U in German, and he's
bit of a narcissist.
That's right, and it's a world composed of Donald Trumps, which is not the most attractive vision of the future that I can think of, and it's a scientific no, it's not quite the word. It's a scientistic view, as Hayek would express it, to view this little machine, Maxu, as how the world works. It doesn't. It works by making adult, ethical human actors. Adult, not entirely independent. The family is crucial and is an important institution. And here I certainly agree with Jim Heckman. But it's about children growing up. That makes for these kinds of adults with equality of permission. No subordination of wives to husbands. No subordination of slaves to masters. No subordination, indeed, of us to the state. In a sense, that last, I'm afraid, that's being reinvented.
Say a little bit more about that.
Well, the man we honor with winning the Nobel Prize just now at the University of Chicago, James Robinson, I'm going to gently j'accuse him tomorrow of being a hopeless statist, as is Acemoglu and Johnson. They always want, let's do a little more of the state stuff. Let's introduce more regulation. Let's do a little more public projects. Let's tax people a little bit more, always a little bit more. And the road to perdition is paved with good intentions. These are not bad people, but I think they're not, well, I don't want to get nasty here, but they're as we say in the South, they're barking up the wrong tree. By the time the hunters get to where the dogs are, the squirrel has gone to another tree. And I think we've got to start barking up the correct tree, which is human creativity.
Yeah.
Made by human liberty. Now I'm not an anarchist. I don't believe we can throw away the state.
Right.
But that doesn't mean we should have more and more state. And that's basically the only proposal. There's an appalling proposal right now in the EU under the chairmanship of the former premier in Italy. Actually, he is and the head of the central bank, Draghi, to spend literally trillions of dollars, state decided where to put them. Now, this is an extremely poor idea. As we say here at Chicago in the Harris School and the Business School and in the Economics Department, we can't do the correct investment following the real creativity from Washington or Brussels or Whitehall. We've got to let individuals put their money where their mouth is. Not let some arts graduate in Rome decide what Italian investment should be.
Right. You mentioned George Stigler was off on his interpretation, his read of Smith.
He was among the worst readers of eminent economists that I've known. He also grossly misread his friend, much admired person, Ronald Coase, and fixed on the economics profession a utter misunderstanding of what Ronald was trying to say. So he did the same with Smith and Coase without intending to. He wasn't trying to mix things up, but he did.
Right. One of the things though that really struck me when I was reading through your kind of revisiting of Smith was that so many people had characterized Smith's views as actually being what Smith was writing against.
Yeah, exactly. He was writing against mercantilism and the capture of the state by the merchants.
Well, I was thinking of the Fable of the Bees in particular.
Fable of the Bees. It's one of the few points in either book, either the Theory of Moral Sentiments or the Wealth of Nations. It's in the Theory of Moral Sentiments that he goes after this guy, that Smith gets really hot and names the person he's attacked
multiple times.
Multiple times. His friend Hume, David Hume, he had some important disagreements with. But you don't ever see Hume's name. He's just saying, well, maybe that's not quite true. A little bit. Whereas with such was the system of Dr. Mandeville that once made such a stir in the world. He's mad. The same way that he was angry at the English laws of settlement, and he got terribly indignant about the imposition on the rights of a poor man to go work where he wants. And he's just outraged by this.
And the thing that really struck me was, and this is, perhaps wading a bit into conjecture, but how did we lose this? Like how did we as economists lose? This isn't even nuance. This is the direct. I mean, in a lot of ways, theory of moral sentiment creates sort of a balance.
It does. He invented, in a way, although I don't think the social psychologists know it, he invented social psychology before it was academic, and then he invented economics before, although, he had an awful lot of help in the economics from the French in particular. But no, it changed in the late 19th century, and then it really got bad in the 20th. What happened is the new liberalism, as it was called in the 1880s in Britain. The old one, Adam Smith's one, and Mary Wollstonecraft and Henry David Thoreau and so on, was, let me have equality of permission, and I'll do the rest, thank you very much. The opening line of Thoreau's essay on civil disobedience says, I am of the opinion that I subscribe to that opinion that says that government is best that governs least, and I wish it would be applied more vigorously, blah, 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 than it is now. After in the late 19th century, came American progressivism towards the end of the century, and this theory in Britain. And what the new liberalism was something like the opposite of the old one. It said, oh no, I'm from the government and I'm here to help you. We're going to use the power of the state to help poor people. And I got into economics because I wanted to help poor people, and I stayed in it because I still want to help them, but I don't think that's how to help them. And then in the 20th century, really from the 1920s on, A.C. Pigou in Britain was one of the theorists and leaders of this in his book called The Economics of Welfare, 1920 or 19, whatever it was. And in it, he laid out, and then it was Keynes made it more clear, and then my Keynesian teachers at Harvard after the war, they made it still more clear with the Chicago School and the Austrians sort of saying, stop, wait a minute, don't do that. The project of modern economics became to think up new ways for the new liberalism to work. New interventions. We got a problem.
We're going to solve it.
We're going to solve it. We're going to assign it to the economists, and they're going to be the social engineers. And, when I was a kid, when I was a graduate student at Harvard, we thought we elite PhD students were going to go down to Washington and fine-tune the economy. We didn't even have a radio. There was nothing to tune. We didn't know what we were doing. And yet people believe in this fine-tuning. And here's one more obstruction in the market for medical care in the United States that we can install, and that'll make everything better.
But you brought up humanomics.
Yeah.
What are we missing right now in economics that we need to reach back for or reach towards?
Well, there are a whole bunch of things we need to reach back to. I mean, for example, the instance I just gave of American medical care, which is a layered tissue of monopolies. It's philo dough, virtually, one layer after another of monopoly, 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 monopoly. Take the drug companies. The Biden administration brags about how wonderful it is that they enabled the state-run medical insurance institutions to bargain with the American drug companies over the price of drugs, and they put a cap on the price of insulin, and now Kamala Harris proposes to extend that some. Look, there is a law in the United States that you can't, if you're an American or in the United States, you can't buy drugs in Canada, period, or in Mexico, or anywhere else.
Anywhere else outside the borders.
And what do you know? The price of drugs in the United States is 5 to 10 times higher than it is in Canada. What? If they really wanted to fix the problem, they would go back to the simple proposition of Adam Smith's that let people trade. Let people buy drugs in Canada, and boom, the prices would fall like a stone. So that's the backward look. One problem in the modern way that we educate economists is they don't know anything about these old books. They don't know about their intellectual roots at all. And they don't know what we call it Chicago price theory. I taught the introductory price theory, graduate price theory course at the University of Chicago back in the 70s, in the glory days for virtually all the graduate students who came into our program. And I taught them how to think like an economist about supply and demand and consumer surplus and equilibrium and blah, blah, blah. And most students now, even at Chicago, well, maybe at Chicago it's not as bad as it is somewhere else, like Harvard. They learn a bunch of fourth-rate applied mathematics from Moscow L, and that's what they think microeconomics is. So there's that problem of looking back. Looking forward, as Keynes and a number of other people said, an economist who only knows economics can't be a very good economist. And what I mean by that is that an economist who doesn't deal with humans in their writings, their novels, their poetry, their philosophy, their history, has to go back to the Max U, or feels he has to. He's stuck with this mechanical vending machine. And that's not wise. A full economics is what I call humanomics. And I've come to this very slowly. This is not something, when I was back teaching at the University of Chicago for 12 years, I didn't know anything about this. I moved to the University of Iowa, and that's where I became a humanist. And at my last assignment at the big state university in Chicago, at the University of Illinois, I was an English professor. So
not a common path.
Not a common path. My My heroine is Mae West, the great comedian of an earlier era. And she was the big blonde. And she said, I was Snow White, but I drifted. I was Snow White. I was a kind of simple-minded, first a Keynesian when I came out of Harvard, but then a Chicago School economist, rather limited in my understanding. A theory of marriage that didn't involve love and things like that. Although, Gary Becker was a great economist, but he was just an economist.
That's right. So love, I will say, is notable because it comes up in your writing often.
It does.
And can you say a little bit more about why I'm seeing it in yours and not seeing it in others?
Well, partly it's because I changed gender in 1995. I was Donald once, and then I changed gender. It was a hell of a shock to my wife of 30 years and my children who haven't spoken to me since. I have 3 grandchildren I've never seen. But, that happens in families all the time. That Aunt Harriet says something unkind to Uncle George at Thanksgiving and they never speak again.
Doesn't make it hurt any less.
No, it doesn't. And it's bad for them. It's bad. What's wrong with having another person to love children? Okay, make sure that you keep your connections to both of your sets of parents and uncles and aunts, and try to get everyone involved in loving your children. But in any case, I changed gender, and I'm not a born woman. And as a guy, as anyone who knew me at Chicago can tell you, I was a tough guy. You're looking at the captain of our high school football team. I was a guard.
I also was a guard.
You were your guard?
Also in a little bit different form, but not as large of a change.
That's right. If you haven't got a sense of humor, I don't advise you change gender. But
it's not on the agenda.
Not on the agenda, but it wasn't.
Well, I guess.
It wasn't on my agenda either. It came, which is actually one of the problems with planning. This top-down notion that you can run an economy, it is slightly crazy because we know in our own lives what's going to happen tomorrow is a little bit vague and surprises us. And what happens next year really surprises. Anyway. So, and that
5-year plans.
That's right. And that brought the question of human attachment, affection. I love my wife, and I will certainly love my children, and I love my mother and father and uncles and so on. As a man, I was reasonably loving, but then I learned the real depths of female friendship, which I had no idea of. It was the great revelation of my gender change. And so it seemed to me, and then I also became, after my gender change, I became a Christian. Didn't happen suddenly.
Just changing all kinds of stuff.
Oh boy, I was changing. And I, that too, is contributes to this. And kind of, I do everything through books. So for some years after my gender change, I would only read novels by women in order to kind of catch up.
Yeah, sure.
It's insane, but that's what I did. And in my becoming an Episcopalian, an Anglican, it was books that I read. I read St. Thomas Aquinas, not everything, but a lot of it. But I read this and I read that. And that, the core of Christianity that made it seem stupid and bizarre to Greek and Roman pagans was that it said that God is love. And the version of the Golden Rule from Jesus is the positive one, do unto others as you would do unto you. But they're about 50 years before, Hillel of Babylon, a great rabbi, put it another way. Don't do unto others what you would not want to be done. You put both versions together, and you've got liberalism. You've got equality of permission. You've got the modern world.
And is that love?
It is love. It's a kind of love. Actually, the positive version of the golden rule is love. That's all about love. In
like an agape sort of way.
Yes. Well, it's certainly agape, but also something called storge, which is family love and can be extended to the market. But Hillel's version is about justice. So love and justice. And love works as a principle of organization in families and small groups of friends, or in small organizations. Justice is more oriented towards the larger society, but you have both, and you've got a liberal society. You're not going to trample on the rights of women, for instance.
Or any of us.
Or any of us. Equality of permission. Equal permission to join the race. Not a guarantee that you'll cross the finish line when everyone else does. That's the socialist vision. And not equality of opportunity, which I believed for many, many years, which is impossible to achieve because we're so varied in where we live, who we are.
Yeah. You give a shout out to one of my favorite authors, Kurt Vonnegut, in the Handicapper General.
That's right. That's right. Well, also, that's right. He's got this marvelous Harrison Bergeron. Yeah, I make a joke about that. I said, in his world, in this world that he imagines in the future, where everyone is handicapped, like racehorses, fast runners have weights on their, and stutterers like me are assigned to read the news. So John Rawls and a few other prominent academics like me who stutter, it takes us 3 minutes to give the weather report.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to hear, so we've been talking a lot about sort of what we know. What's on the frontier? Where are you finding life in your research these days?
I find it in lots of ways. As I mentioned, we're almost finished with a very long book. It's, I don't know, it'll be 500 pages or some crazy number when it's published, on open fields and enclosures in the English Middle Ages. This is work that I started as long ago as 50 years ago. I mean, when you're 82, pours out of your mouth these strange magnitudes. Half a century ago, I started this. But anyway, it was scattered in various journals aimed at completely different readers. And so I'm trying to bring it to a climax. And in that, I was calling it, in my youth, I was calling it the prudent peasant. But now I'm calling it the prudent and faithful peasant. And that's a frontier that we need to explore. I don't mean just from a theological sense. My friends in Barcelona tell me about two words that the Catalans apply to themselves. Senya, which means common sense, rationality, max u, appropriate to the great commercial place that Barcelona has been for almost 1,000 years. But also rauxa, passion. The passion that kept the Barcelonans fighting against the fascists right to the end of the Spanish Civil War. So, Senya y rauxa, And that's what I'm coming to see in this institution and its long history of open fields and then in the enclosure movement. But more generally, with Vernon Smith and Bart Wilson, who's a great economist.
Like Chapman?
They're both at Chapman. We and a few others, Ariel Klammer in Holland and a few others, we want us to have an economics that keeps the math and the statistics, although I've got very serious problems with the way modern econometrics is done, but that's a separate issue. Keeps all that stuff, asking how much, how big, but also saying why, what the point is, what the reason is. Ariel Klammer, this person I mentioned, this economist I mentioned, goes around now interviewing people, and he says to them, what's the purpose in your life? And they say, well, support my family. And Arya says to them, why? And he keeps saying that. Why? Yep. Why? He's like some 4-year-old. Why? And exactly, or Socrates, or whoever was doing it. Yeah, that's right. And so we need a broader economics. That doesn't mean superficial. You've got to be serious. If you're going to study, I'm doing right now a paper with a colleague at Cato who's a classicist on the 3 forms in Attic Greek of indirect speech. One of which was about verbs of seeing and knowing for sure, and the other which was about verbs of merely hearing and having an opinion that. And we believe that that's where Socrates / Plato gets their hostility to rhetoric. It comes out of the grammar, and it's peculiar to Attic. It's not in Homeric Greek. It's not in the Koine. I don't think that Plato had this in mind. He just thought, well, there's a difference between really knowing and just, in fact, that opining, that distinction has come into the modern world. My great inspiration in this was a wonderful professor at the University of Chicago, Wayne Booth, who asked me in my last year at Chicago before I decided to leave, I was Donald, will you do a talk on the rhetoric of economics? I think it was because I had a reputation for being slightly less barbarous than my colleagues in economics. And I said, sure, Wayne, but what's that? Yeah. And from that came my understanding that language is crucial to science.
Yeah.
And then for decades I denied, as my friends keep saying, it applies to society generally. I finally got that. And now Bart Wilson and I are working on a paper on a survey article on humanomics. So that's where I want the field to go. I've written a couple of books on it. And all my thinking, I'm working in some papers on political theory, one of which is called equality of permission, and the other is called the liberal family. And I'm going to talk to the guy, my editor at the press, Shab, tomorrow and see if he's interested in pursuing this. But anyway, economics has got to get broader. We've got to stop sneering at English professors. It's just stupid.
I mean, not just English professors. We kind of do. We're pretty generous in our sneering.
Well, we're equal opportunity sneerers. Yeah, we really are.
Well, and to honor the work that you're doing, then, can I ask, what are you passionate about right now outside of economics, outside of your research?
Cricket.
Really?
I'm a big cricket fan. I learned the game and actually...
As most people coming to Chicago are.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Well, actually, I was on the University of Chicago cricket team, which was a bunch of Indian graduate students and a few Americans.
Wow.
When I was a professor here.
There's still games that happen in Washington Park on a regular basis. Kind of there to the university.
That's where I first saw it. Joanne and I had learned about it in England and became cricket fans because we were baseball fans. And we were driving our Triumph Spitfire. It was a top-down in 1968 when I came to Chicago by Washington Park. And through the trees, I saw these men standing around in white clothes.
Just dressed all in white.
Doing nothing. I thought, a cricket game. And this is amazing. I went over. It was a bunch of West Indians.
Yeah.
I joined their team. They would put me in the outfield as far away as they could get because I was not very good. And I met a guy from Jamaica who had bowled to me in the Finsbury Park nets back in London.
Oh my God!
When I was learning to bat.
Yeah.
He was a conductor on the buses. And they would stop the bus on their way back to the barn, and
Jump out.
he would come out and bowl a few overs, and he ended up on this team in Chicago. Because apparently they could go either way. They could either go to London to work or go to Chicago to work. I was amazed. But that's one passion of mine. But also what else am I? Well, I'm right in this season. I'm passionate about politics, but we don't need to go into that.
Well, I think all of that's made possible because of the Great Enrichment. So
yeah, absolutely. I was in India just now. I became the president of the Mont Pelerin Society.
Congratulations.
Which both Milton Friedman and George Stigler were. In India, they're mad about on cricket. It was once an aristocratic game in India.
Yeah.
It was the Raja's game. Yeah. They'd go to Cambridge and they had very stylish batting. And it's become popular because of TV, because of this innovation.
Yeah.
They're just nuts on it, as are the Pakistan. I was just one of my Uber drivers this morning was an Indian, and we had a nice chat about it. I said to him when I got out of the Uber, I said, my advice to you, keep a straight bat and watch out for the googlies.
Watch out for the googlies, indeed. Well, thank you very much. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the...
Well, I'd like to share...
Yeah, anything I didn't ask about that I should have.
Well, look, I very often say goodbye to people with what my dad used to say. Be good. If you can't be good, be careful.
I very much appreciate that.
Thank you, dear.
Well, thank you so much.
It's sound advice, actually.
I will definitely make note of it.
All right, Ben. Wonderful, wonderful interview. Thank you so much for bringing that to us here at the Pie. What stood out to you in this conversation?
Well, we really stumbled into some surprising turns there in Deirdre's life, both in research and in her personal life, as she moved through schools of thought from Marxism to classical liberalism, and as she came out to her then wife and children as trans. For me, our conversation very much resonated with her academic emphasis on our need to rediscover Adam Smith's complete vision, which ultimately is about acknowledging much more of our own complexity.
All right. Well, Ben, thank you so much for bringing us another slice today.